Thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here. And we are going to get started, and you will notice that some people will join us as we start, which is okay. But yeah, for the sake of time, we're going to get started. My name is Maria Soledad. You can call me Sole. I will introduce myself a bit more later. But I do want to say welcome to this space where we are going to explore working with power, understanding, and really getting a sense of how is power present in our work on food and agricultural commodity systems. This event is part of a series of events that are run through the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems FACS community, which has a digital platform that you can join. So you're more than welcome to do so as well if you haven't done so yet. And this event is going to be recorded, and all materials are going to be shared after the session. So everything that you see here will be made available to you. So the idea is that we are going to spend 2 hours together online. It's quite a lot. So we would like to invite you, and the way that we've designed this session is in a way that it's interactive, that hopefully it's engaging, that helps you and helps us all connect some of the ideas around what it means to work with power with our concrete work that we do on a day-to-day basis in trying to change those systems. So we will invite you to keep your videos open as much as you can. We will ask for your feedback and insights to share in plenary. There will be some moments where we do some breakout groups. And most importantly, we will have a few moments and dynamics in which we will invite you to think and reflect of these ideas in terms of your work, how it's applied to your work. This is an introductory session. As you probably know already, working with power is a complex, it's a complex thing. And so this is an ongoing journey that we are hoping to start going deeper into as the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems team, supporting country projects and supporting practitioners as well from our community in deepening the awareness and understanding on working with power. So today what we are going to do is we're going to start with a little bit of framing and context. How did we go about putting together this session? What's the project or initiative behind? And you can see that for some of you who are familiar, this is an event that we are running under our support to the FOLUR global project. I'm going to introduce 2 of our hosts as well, not just me, and our team as well from the community who are supporting the event today. And we are going to deep dive already into experiences of power in food and agricultural commodity systems. How do they show up? What are we doing to understand them? And also, we are going to invite everyone to co-create and reflect on what is power, because there isn't one definition. So we are going to have that exercise today of thinking, what is power for us and how does it show up and manifest? We're going to go into a break, and then we're going to have a very, I would say, interesting and simple way, yet very profound in its content. A presentation from Jethro, our expert on power today, talking about different forms of power. So how can we put words to what we see and what we experience? How can we start articulating so that we can work with these ideas and not just have a sense of I'm feeling empowered or powerless? What does that mean? How do I work through this? So part of looking into forms of power is bringing that kind of articulation and wording to our experience. Then we're going to go into a last pair group exercise where we are going to focus on what can we do about what we see and what we experience in our work, and start getting more into the action of things that you can do after this session that can help you accelerate your work. Then we're going to have a closing and next steps. Just a very quick introduction. As I said, this session is part of our support to the FOLUR project. For those of you who are not familiar with FOLUR, it stands for Food Systems, Land Use and Restoration. It's a 345 million 7-year initiative funded by the GEF and led by the World Bank. UNDP, together with other agencies, is part of the global platform supporting this project under what we call the Good Growth Partnership. And the objective of the project is to transform food and land use systems, accelerating action in landscapes, and focusing on along value chains for 8 major commodities: livestock, cocoa, coffee, maize, palm oil, rice, soy, and wheat. There's a global platform that we support, as I mentioned, and the scope of the project is 27 countries. And our support through the global platform is focusing on 3 pillars: program and capacity strengthening, policy and value chain engagement, and strategic knowledge management and communications. This activity falls under program and capacity strengthening, although, and I hope after this session, at the end of the session, we can argue that it supports all 3 pillars in a way, because working with power cuts across policy, value chain engagement, and also knowledge management and communications. Very quickly, just to say, why are we working on power and why are we working on food and agriculture as UNDP? As you know, agriculture has an enormous footprint. It accounts for 70% of fresh water use, 80% of global deforestation, biodiversity loss, as it's stated on the screen, 70% of the labor, 60% of the labor force, and 25% of the GDP in low-income countries. And over 2/3 of people surviving on less than $1 a day live and work in rural areas, either as smallholder farmers or agricultural laborers. So as you can see, food and agriculture cuts across all the different systems that at UNDP are critical to our mission and to our the advancing of the 17 SDGs, our strategic plan signature solutions. And of course, it presents, because of its complexity and the interlinkages, it presents also a huge opportunity to work in partnership with other agencies within and outside UNDP. It's an opportunity as well to leverage on private sector and private sector financing, so funneling and channeling resources to transform and accelerate these agendas. And currently, the FACTS portfolio is 1.2 billion in 140 countries and 500 landscapes. So definitely a lot of scope to provide support and accelerate impact in all of these projects. Now we talk about effective collaborative action, which is our entry point for supporting FOLUR and in this case, working with power. This is what we are currently, the way in which we are framing multi-stakeholder collaboration. And when we talk about effective collaborative action, we're basically saying we need to find effective ways of bringing change into food systems. And collaboration comes as a strategic and essential practice because challenges cannot be solved by one person or one institution alone. We're talking about extremely complex and interconnected, as we said, systems and challenges. So we need collaboration, and we also need that collaboration to be effective and to be driven by action. So we need to take action to minimize the presence and impact of these trends. There are some very interesting materials on effective collaborative action in our digital platform, so I'm not going to go deep into this, but basically all the work that we do under capacity building and supporting collaborative spaces, multi-stakeholder dialogues and platforms falls under what we call the effective collaborative action in the FACTS team. And it's a methodology that helps us articulate and structure the way in which we look at, design, and support multi-stakeholder collaborative processes. We're more than welcome to share more about that. And there's going to be some discovery sessions taking place later on in the year if you want to learn more about this methodology. But just to say, if you notice, one of the 10 key principles of effective collaborative action is inclusion and working with power. So this is where we're anchoring our session today. And I'm going to pass it on to our two friends here today, colleagues that will be also supporting and leading through the content of this session, Nicola and Jethro. Please, Nicola, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Soleil. And very good to see some familiar faces today and some new ones. I'm leading a work on innovation in the FACS team, which key component is collaboration. I'm based in Brussels, Belgium, and I've been in the team for 8 years, more or less. And I pass it to Jethro.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I think there's a slide that Soleil asked me to put together. I'm Jethro Pettit. I'm based in Italy. I work as a facilitator, designer of learning processes, and also a researcher. I worked for about 20 years in the NGO sector in agroecology, sustainable development, and rural development kinds of initiatives, and then moved into more of a sort of policy and training role at the Institute of Development Studies at Sussex. So a lot of what I'll be sharing today really comes out of well, years of experience, but also an evolution of a way of thinking about power that has come out very much of processes of multi-stakeholder participation, citizen participation in local government and government responsiveness, processes of voice and inclusion, and how voices can be heard and responded to, studies of democracy. So it comes from a broader than agriculture, I guess I'm saying, but a whole lineage of ways of thinking about power that has included a lot of agricultural and rural development processes, participatory methodologies, and so forth. So yeah, I do a lot of facilitation, training, and publications, and you can see some examples of that. Asia, Africa, and Latin America. My main experience has been in Latin America in terms of field experience and language, but I've also worked extensively in Asia and Africa, and I'm really looking forward to getting to know you and sharing with you. So
Thank you, Jethro.
I'll
Thank you
hand
very
back
much.
to Soleil.
Thank you so much. And we're definitely looking forward as well to hearing and learning from you. And before we move into starting with our own connection to experiences and content, I'm going to do a little test of who's listening, who's connected to the session. And the action that we need to take now is I'm going to ask you to put in your name on Zoom your organization, where you're, which organization are you joining us from? And what's your preferred language for breakout groups? So just the initials, you can put EN for English, SP for Spanish, FR for French. And that way we can try our best to pair you up with someone that shares your own, the same language, basically. Try our best. Let's see. Let's see if we have some people already. Excellent. Thank you. If you can put it on your Zoom name, that would be great, because that will help us then organize the breakout groups. So let's take a few more seconds to do that. You can do that by clicking on the 3 dots and rename. The 3 dots on your image and rename. If you can change your name on Zoom, not just on the chat, but on Zoom, if you can change your name on Zoom, the way that you do that is basically you go on the 3 dots on the right top corner of your image, of your screen image, where you show, and then you change your name. Perfect. Thank you, Henrique. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Jethro, to introduce our next exercise while people get their names and language fine-tuned. And we're going to go then into the breakout groups.
Terrific. Great. Thank you, Soleil. So we always like to start these kinds of sessions by really reflecting on our own experience, because that's really the best guide for making sense of reality together with concepts and theories that might be useful. But the experiential part is very important. And so what we'd like you to do, invite you to do, is to reflect um, on a moment in your work related to food and agricultural commodity systems. Maybe the next slide. Yeah. Um, think about a moment, a time when you noticed power was operating in some way, that it was affecting your work, and it may be that you felt yourself powerful or powerless, or you noticed power dynamics going on that were having some effect on a process that you were involved in. So really, it's just about bringing up an experience, and it could be very specific, one particular moment, or a more general time when power dynamics were very evident in your work on food and agricultural systems. So what we're going to do is move into pairs and breakout groups, and each person will take about 5 minutes to share their story, including kind of what you saw and what you heard and what you felt. So try to get out of only an analytical space and think about, what was that like for you, your whole person in that situation. And the person listening um, is an active listener, so not a lot of interruption or analysis, just listening carefully, clarifying questions, but let the speaker speak and see what you notice when you hear their story. So we'll leave, I don't know if this slide will be available, but you'll have these instructions in the chat in your breakouts. And I guess I'll pass back to Alejandra to set us up with, no?
Surely, surely. I'm on it. 1 second, sorry.
Great.
Yes.
No worries. I know you're doing the language pairs. So
Yeah.
I mean, I think you've got the basic idea. I think what we're trying to do is include not only an analysis at this point, but kind of the feeling and experience of power. And then we will also be moving into a more analytical perspective later on. But um, for that reason, it helps to pick a very specific moment, maybe even just in one meeting when you saw something happening, or something was going on in a process that was either blocking or enabling that process to go forward. And what was that experience like?
Thank you, Jethro.
And I think halfway through, you'll get a little reminder to change roles. So one person um, changes to becoming a listener rather than a speaker.
Sure. Jethro, we're ready. If you want, we can start with
Alejandra,
the
vámonos.
Excellent, thank you. I think we have most people assigned. We're missing James.
So welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good chance to share some experiences of uh, encounters with power, dynamics of power in your work. Um, we'd like to just hear some highlights if you have any, um, just insights, observations. Um, what kinds of uh, things did you talk about or hear about? We'll just do a very quick brainstorm of your experiences of power. Anyone can just unmute and jump in or raise your hand. Yes, Abu Bakari.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good morning. I don't know where you are, everybody. This is from Tanzania. I was with my colleagues from Indonesia, Barakala, in short, Bara, and we share, our experience and sort of from the places. So, from Bara, he said that Indonesia, you can't do anything without involving the central government. It's like whatever you want to do, you have really to involve them. Otherwise, you'll be in trouble. And was giving an example one time that WWF was a little bit warned because of constantly use the word deforestation. But Bara, you can correct me around that. So because they not comfortable talking about the deforestation in public, so you can see how this really put some organization in really difficult situation unless they compromise the government, something like that. Maybe the situation may not be maybe the same with their countries, but may not be the same for Tanzania. Although yes, we have to involve, but maybe there's some way we can influence the decision around that. So I think Baraka, I have really summarized the well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was a really good examples. Let's hear from someone else, either hand or unmute. I see Alexandra.
No, it was not a raised hand.
Okay.
Sorry.
I see a hand, but maybe it's a clapping. Okay. Thank
I
you.
can share. I
Yes,
can share
Brenda,
what we
thank you.
discussed. I shared with we shared with each other with Hazia. I hope I'm pronouncing his name very well. And then we talked about the fact that we have power, like a position power, but we also discussed government and in the policy processes or in policy implementation, that they have the position power to be able to convene different stakeholders within this field, either to develop policies or to think through how to implement policies, as well as to reflect upon this. However, that is not always the case. So we talked of the position power and then the convening power that they have. And then, but that isn't always the case, because there is always the question of, okay, where are the finances that are going to support this process? And then we said, on the other side, finances are in a way of they are a way of empowerment. So it's an empowerment resource, and those who have the finances also can use it as a carrot to try and get people to work together, or get actors who are interested in these finances to work together, which in a way gives a sense of on the one side, there is hope, but it's also on the other side, you feel hopeless of what can be done without finances having to come first. So that's the conversation that we had.
Mhm. Excellent. Very interesting. That's great. If there is one more who'd like to share, I think we have time for one more, just to get some highlights. And I can't see everybody. Hold on. Change my view.
Hello, myself.
There we go.
Yeah,
Is there someone?
can I? Yeah, myself, Jethro Pettit. I am
Yes,
from India.
Deba Jyoti
Yeah,
Kundu.
yeah. I say myself from FAO, India. Hello.
Yes, welcome.
Yeah,
Welcome.
I just want to share my concerns regarding this food system because I'm also working with the sustainable food system under a follow projects only. So when we are talking about the sustainable food system, the main problem is for sustainable food practices, how we can incentivize the farmers. Because if we want to like practice sustainable practices, then our cost of production is increasing. So how the farmers will bear that additional cost if they are not able to sell those particular products in a premium price? Because market still in India is not very much developed to cater those sustainable products by paying premium prices. So that's a big challenge for us in India, how those sustainable practices can be like scale up with the farmers. Though it is necessary for the environmental point of view, but at the same time, how that can be financed so that the farmers don't have to bear the additional cost.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Really interesting example. Great. I think just in the interest of time, we're going to move ahead, even though there's so much rich to share, but you'll have a chance to bring these stories back in a little bit later and these experiences. So I'm going to hand to Sole now and Nicolas to talk a little bit about um, what we heard in the pre-survey
Yes.
about your experiences of power.
Thank you very much, Jethro, and thank you for all of you who shared your own examples and challenges. We are going to weave them in, as Jethro was saying. And so we're building up this understanding of how we experience power from this check-in session, paired storytelling, and also from the insights that we gathered from the pre-session survey. So we had responses from different places around the world and different focus areas in terms of work and commodity. Now, a very quick question. What percentage of the responses do you think said yes to how much do you experience power dynamics at work? 20%, 40, 80, 90, 120?
100.
100, absolutely. That is exactly right. So 100% of responses, have you encountered any power dynamics and challenges in your work? So power is there, it's present. I'm going to go slightly quick through these slides because I want us to focus much more on the work that's been done and also in how to work and address this power dynamics. But we also asked in the survey, we asked you to rank those power dynamics that were most present and most challenging. And as you can see, the top ones are parts of food and agricultural commodity systems that dominate. So trade, access to finance, conventional farming methods, demand-driven pricing, dominance of more powerful actors or stakeholders, less powerful actors or stakeholders lacking access or representation. We're going to share this with you, and we are also going to ask you, for those that couldn't answer the pre-session survey if you can still do it, because all of this data is very useful for all of us in terms of gathering how we experience power at work. Then how often? Well, seems that pretty often, from less than once a month to a few times a month to about once a week. And how these power dynamics affect or impede the progress of your work on transforming food and ag systems, from somewhat to strongly, with a huge max on regularly. And some insights on where this shows up: oil palm space, so private sector controlling the supply chain, blind spots in the design and implementation of donor-funded projects, helping indigenous people and local communities being taken seriously as sustainable food actors, dominance of a limited set of food commodities on the global agenda. So these are some examples that you brought in. Most of the people that responded to the survey said that they were familiar with methods, tools, and approaches. And to your point, Brenda, is there hope? It seems there is, because the people that said that they were familiar with methods on working with power also highlighted that they were somewhat effective to effective when using them in understanding and addressing these power dynamics. So there is something there that is worthwhile exploring. And the ask from this session was to gain skills and knowledge to understand where our thinking in food and agricultural commodity systems is at, to listen to the people that are sharing their experiences and expertise, and understand how power dynamics can play out and the tools to address them. So yeah, hopefully we will go through all of this during the session, and we are already doing it. But just to say, it's not just about the experts in a way talking, it's about also harnessing our collective experience and insights, because clearly you all have a lot of experience and learnings to share. So I'm going to pass it over to Jethro. Back to you for the next section.
I think first of all, welcome to anyone who's just joined. I think what you just said is really important, Soleil, because sometimes we take concepts or theories or ideas that have been formulated, and we try to kind of squeeze our experience into them, or categorize our experience according to what experts are telling us is going on. And I think it's very important to really look at what is happening in our context, each of us, with fresh eyes and open ears, and really notice what is going on in all the dimensions that people have already shared. So we've heard people talking about the role of government, the role of position, the role of convening, the role of finance and financial resources, the position of farmers, and the issue of markets. A lot of examples that you gave in the pre-survey. And all of these are evidence of what is happening. And we will turn to some very useful frameworks and theories that can help us make sense of this. We'd like to start with a little bit of more of a co-created understanding from your experiences. What kinds of power do you see at work in food and agricultural commodity systems, or in your efforts to transform them? What are the dynamics of power going on, and what would you call that? And we're just going to have a little bit of a brainstorm. This is now stepping back a little bit from the storytelling to give some names to what we're experiencing. And we already heard some very interesting language around convening power, around the role of central government, around position of power, around financial power, around market power. So let's just use this Google slide here, you can take a sticky note. You should be able to have access to it if you go to the link. And just write whatever words come to mind. If you were to be asked, well, what is power? What is the power you are seeing and experiencing in your work on food and agricultural commodity systems? And what would you call that? And just, write on the sheets, on the little stickies, and we'll just see what comes up.
Thank you, Jethro. And just to
Regulatory,
say,
yeah.
sorry, just to say, if anyone is not able to access the Google slide because you're on your mobile phone, just feel free to open your mic and share out loud or on the chat, and we will transfer it to the Google slide. Thank you.
Yeah, you don't have to raise your hand, just open your mic and say it, and one of us will write it down. And keep in mind as you're writing, some of these may be forms of domination or coercion or kind of power over. Some of them may be sort of authoritative power of the role and position of certain actors. That is sort of legitimate power. Some of them may be forms of agency, voice, the power to, to speak and jump in, power of beliefs, of ideas. Wow, great to see so many. This is great. Well, I think what a flurry of really, really interesting range and array of forms and expressions of power. And because the flurry is slowing down a little bit, we're going to move on. We're going to come back to this, and the pause will give us an opportunity to study it and maybe do a little bit of reflection and clustering so that when we come back to it, we can look at it. What we'd like to do now is pass to Nicolas to share a few insights and examples of how power is showing up in the work of UNDP's work on food and agricultural commodity systems. So over to you, Nicolas.
Thank you, Jethro. Thank you very much. So let me see, 1 second. All right, so as we've seen, working with power is definitely key for effective collaboration. We've seen that in the survey, and you've seen also that for us, it's one of key principles. And basically, power, equity, inclusiveness is really one of the hottest topics in multi-stakeholder processes, you know. So it's constantly being mentioned as one of the key challenge by participants in multi-stakeholder processes, or in the training that we did. As you saw, you know, 100% said it is an issue that they are faced constantly. And basically the effectiveness of the multi-stakeholder processes that we do is depending on participation, diversity, equity, etc. And there's also questions around thinking about critically about, you know, political economy issues in multi-stakeholder processes. Who's benefiting, who lose out, whose voice are we listening to, etc. You know, there's a big debate at the moment in the development sector on the decolonizing development debate. And you've seen in the response on the survey some colonial mindsets being referred to as well. So working with power is key for collaboration, but also it's key for system transformation, because if you want to transform a system, it's deeply political, as we are covering here. So it's important for collaboration, it's important for system change, but at UNDP, recognizing that we have so much to learn on the topic and we have so many blind spots in the way we operate as individual or as organization, in the way we convene multi-stakeholder processes, we have been using what we call the collaboration inquiry to try to deepen our understanding on working with power. And I think one person here was in the co-inquiry. I think was there. Brenda was there. Is that correct? Participated. She's still. So
Yes, I did.
yes, you did. So what we do, so the co-inquiry is a methodology basically where you're trying to have deeper learning, where you try to create a safe space where people can reflect more deeply on key questions such as power. And the methodology for the co-inquiry is really to look at blind spots and hard truth, and at the same time building trust and relationship and motivating action. And so we've been doing those co-inquiry for 3 years now. And the initial questions was how can we work more systemically, you know, with system change in mind. And then and every time we do a co-inquiry, there's a report. You can see the report there and they can be shared in the chat. And the second cycle, we looked at system change in practice, system leadership, or documenting system change. And the last cycle, 2 years ago, was around working with power. And the question was, how can we work more effectively with power in the context specifically of multi-stakeholder processes? So that's not covering, you know, necessarily access to finance or the way the traders operate with farmers or et cetera, et cetera. It was really in the context of multi-stakeholder processes. And next slide. And so we had around 70 participants, and basically 3 key ideas came out from the co-inquiry. So we unpacked them. We unpacked a number of key ideas. And so first is that power is neither good nor bad. And there are many different forms of power. I think Jethro is going to present that in a coming presentation. The second one was that working with power really starts with yourself, you know, so working on your individual awareness is key and is foundational to be able to work with power. So how do you ensure that inner work is part of the process, or how do you ensure that the different stakeholders in multi-stakeholder processes recognize the power that they hold? And the next key idea was that facilitating collaboration in those processes is really about navigating through power dynamics. And many of us here today are facilitators of those multi-stakeholder processes or participants in those multi-stakeholder processes. And so how can we navigate that as those processes are embedded in power structures? So in the next slide, you can see just one example, which is actually the Dutch food chain, which is taken from colleagues at Wageningen University. And you can see the concentration of power between, you have the farmers, there are 65,000, the food manufacturers, there's 6,500, suppliers, purchasing company, you have only like 5 purchasing companies. And then you have the supermarket concept and the supermarket, and then you have the shoppers and the consumers. So there's a huge concentration in the food chain, which gives the purchasing managers of supermarkets a great deal of power. And so this is important to take into account for any commodities we work with, and for example, I was working with cotton before for many years. And in cotton, you have, 5 to 10 global traders that have the entire market. And so those traders at global level have a huge amount of power in the system, but then also at local level, the local traders, the way they interact with the farmers have also really significant power. So how do you design processes taking into account power consideration? Or do you manage group dynamics? And what are the key questions that was unpacked is what are the key mechanisms for balancing, shifting power dynamics, or better balancing power dynamics. So in the next slide, I'm just presenting some examples of the way we unpack those questions. So for example, the first question was, how can you design processes that takes into account power? So I'm not going to read everything for the purpose of time, but just to say that, the current practice is that often we have a lack of awareness or skills or space and priority to discuss power dynamics. The way projects are designed, the way we set up the agenda, we make a lot of assumptions, about stakeholders group. We're saying the private sector or the farmers, yet private sector is a highly heterogeneous group, or farmers are very heterogeneous groups. Some are also workers, some have multiple jobs. You have rich farmers, poor farmers, middle income farmers, etc. So we make a lot of assumptions in the way we talk about stakeholders. And often those multi-stakeholder processes are managed and started from the global north. And so the expertise is also located in a particular class, and designers are often bypassing important steps due to urgency. So power is really an afterthought, we are not investing the time needed. And we talk about meaningful participation, but or inclusivity, how much this is truly understood, etc. So anyway, I'm not going to the details, but what we did in the co-inquiry is try to start unpacking what could be a better multi-stakeholder process that takes into account the consideration of power. So for example, one is about developing power literacy, which is the knowledge and the reflexivity and interpretations to gain a better understanding of power dynamics, avoiding treating stakeholders as homogeneous groups, as I mentioned, conducting power checks, power analysis, and also being open about our own institutional blind spots and power differentials. So us at UNDP, what type of power do we have in setting up the agenda, when we design a project, when we convene stakeholders, and recognizing that power. And so overall, also, how can you make power more visible through consistent questioning? What the meeting we're having today, the discussion we're having today, having those conversations. And so how do you create space to discuss about it, etc. But it's also a commitment from leadership to invest the time needed in doing that work. Next slide. And so we also looked specifically at the context of food systems, because the slides before was quite generic to multi-stakeholder processes that can apply to any sector, to education, to health, to governance, etc. And so we explore how power is playing in the specific domain of food systems, which can be very different than other sectors, as we have seen a bit before. And so the goal was a bit to question the elephant in the room that we might not be talking about. And so we used the reports from civil society, the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, that was looking at how power can be shifted or better balanced from a civil society standpoint. And it's called the Long Food Movement, and we can share also the link after that. And we used that report because it provided an analysis of food system transformation that was power sensitive, basically. So it gave us a useful language for discussion. So, current practice, I think some of you are very familiar with it. As we discussed, power is highly concentrated in the hands of a few giants, mega corporations, both at trader level, retailers level, etc., finance. There's a lot of land grabs, resource grabs in multiple countries. You have opaque supply chains. You have a confusing array of sustainability claims, many claims. Farmers, they have to work with organic and fair trade and different sustainable practices at the same time. A key thing that came back in the discussion is the lack of appropriate governance mechanisms to allow for best distribution of power. As I mentioned before, MSPs are often depoliticized. We don't talk about power. We don't bring the politics in, and civil society also challenged the agenda, but cannot really change the course. So we discussed what is needed. Some is coming from the report, some is coming from the co-inquiry. So it's just to stimulate a bit the conversation here. So UN institutions like us need to take a more critical view of power relations within global food systems, and especially looking at the dominant globalized agro-industrial and the commodity approach to agriculture, monoculture, etc. They've been talking about reforms of UN agencies, what drives decision-making. So challenging, in a way, the existing development paradigm, which is full of contradictions, taking a systemic view and critically reflect on what multi-stakeholder means. Are we actually perpetuating an equitable power relationship by assuming that they are power neutral? Transforming governance structure is a key thing, making power visible, which is what we are trying to start unpacking here, and also rooting food systems in diversity, agroecology, human rights, etc., etc. So I'm not going to give you the long list. We're going to share the reports with you. And just the last slide on my side. So as you can see, that co-inquiry was very useful for us and the participants to unpack what we mean by working with power. It means different things for different people. And so we evolve our work as a result. And so what we do currently, we build power literacy for practitioners. So through the sessions like today, like discovery session or deep dive session, we have a community of practice that you are part of. We organize different collaboration lab. So this is really something we're trying to bring to the table in the different projects. We, of course, facilitate multi-stakeholder processes and collaborative space where we're trying to be really mindful in the way we design the process and the way we facilitate the process to look at power. We provide advisory supports on that, so promoting some of the tools and practices, exploring different forms of power that you're going to look at now. We provide support on conducting power analysis, for example, for some of our projects. We develop knowledge products, communication material. So we're planning this year to develop a guide on working with power that will include all those tools and practices. We write blogs around that. But the key thing we are designing now is in our team, we're designing a new flagship initiative on food and power that's going to start exploring exactly that. And so that's a big endeavor, but we are committed to it as we see that as key for transformation. So I'll stop here. I don't know if there are any questions, and I'll pass it back to Soleil also.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you very much. And yes, before we go into a quick bio break of 3-4 minutes, and yeah, it's going to be a little bit short, but the idea is for us to be able to stretch our legs, or just take a beverage if you want to. Any questions? Any comments? Feel free to leave them on the chat as well. When we come back from this 3-4 minute break, we will hear from Jethro, our guest expert and speaker on forms of power. And then we will close this session with the interactive exercise on applying those forms of power to our own work. So please don't disconnect your Zoom. Just turn off your camera, keep your microphone on mute. We will start promptly in, I would say, 4 minutes, if that's okay. So 13 minutes past the hour. That's very precise. And then if you have any comments or questions, obviously we can also take them after the break. Thank you. 13 minutes past the hour, so very sharp and promptly. Hi, Adisu, nice to see you. Hello. So yeah, as mentioned, we're going to spend, hi, can you hear us? Yeah?
I can, I was muted, sorry.
Oh.
So, hi everyone, it's nice to meet you all. Here from
Very nice.
Adisu, yeah.
Thank you, Adisu. So yeah, over to you, Jethro, to explore different forms of power.
Yeah, thank you, Soleil, and welcome back, everyone. Excuse me. We had a chance to look briefly at the forms of power that you identified from your reflections, and it's a very interesting. They're a little bit clustered now, but you can see in the upper left side, this is mostly forms of power to do with policy, decision making, particularly government, but also other powerful actors, decisions, regulatory power, and the position of that administrative regulatory power. So that's a whole category. Below it, there's a lot of things to do with financial power and market power. And I also see there's one about access and the right to land and natural resources, which is a resource issue. So power around resources, which we also heard about in your examples. Then there's a whole group, sort of, let's say, a little bit to the right of that, sort of center right, around dominance, coercion, corruption, intimidation, monopoly power, bureaucracy driving inaction. And I think it's an interesting category. They're not all the same thing, but they all have to do somewhat with things that are going on behind the scenes, or maybe even in front of you, that have to do a little bit more with a little bit more of a brute power of force, of coercion, dominance, and et cetera, not necessarily legitimate, as the upper left could be seen as legitimate form of government, regulatory power. And then if you drop down to the bottom underneath that, there's a whole area of things around knowledge. Sorry, I think political power would have gone up above, but and power of defining programs and problems and priorities would go down. But this whole area of knowledge, scientific knowledge, the power of knowledge, who has knowledge, as a form of power, and related to it, slightly to the right, culture and cultural norms and values, and also the power of the digital realm and digitization, digital literacy. So a lot of stuff around kind of knowledge, culture, beliefs, perhaps. And then in the upper right, I've clustered the things that kind of had to do with people's agency. So the power of individual, personal empowerment and leadership, the power of group, social capital, network power, group collective power, and activities related to influencing, lobbying, advocacy, and engagement. So there's quite a bit there around kind of collective forms of power. So I think it's interesting. One could play with it further, but as a very quick clustering, I think there's a lot of really rich material here, and I think it covers a lot of what I will now go into with a couple of slides to briefly share with you some frameworks of power that people have found useful. And as I mentioned um, before we just jump into the frameworks, I think we've seen from what you shared. Sorry, if we just go to the first slide, the one that said what and where is power. Um, Power is very, as we've seen, it can be held by individuals, by groups, even by the natural world. It's a lot of power. Um, it can be structural, built into institutions, and systems, um, very strongly kind of hardwired into the way institutions work and interact. Um, but power can also be very fluid and dependent on the exact moment that we're in. So it's not static. It's always moving and messy and dynamic. Um, and we'll talk a little bit later about how power is always shifting and can be contested. Power is intersectional, which is a word that refers to all the different identities that we hold and bring into the spaces that we interact in. Those could be identities related to our ethnicity, class, caste, gender, sexuality, history, location, lots of different identities. Those come into play, especially in multi-stakeholder processes, and they can often derail those processes or make them very complex and difficult. And power is very internalized. It's socialized. We are socialized into power relations through our upbringing and our cultures and belief systems and so on. And it's very embodied. So it's not just something we hold in our heads, but something we hold in our entire bodies and that we experience in public, private, and intimate realms of our lives. And those are often very related. Um, Power isn't good or bad. It depends on the purpose to which it's being used. So let's go to the next one, Alejandra. And this is a framework that, as I mentioned earlier, has evolved and grown, I'd say, over the last 30, 40 years, coming through political science, sociology, social theory, but very much also through practice and experience, particularly in the area of decision making, government decision making, and citizen participation, whether in citizen-state relations, say in municipal planning, council decision making, or um, in stakeholder processes, multi-stakeholder processes, or participatory development, civil society activity, government responsiveness. So that's where these come from, but I think they have particular relevance and usefulness for food and agricultural commodity systems and multi-stakeholder processes, and many of the things that Nicolas described as being challenging and difficult and not always working. And I think we can recognize in these exactly the kinds of categories that you just came up with on the sticky notes. So visible power is kind of the very obvious power that you can see. It's the decision making, in making and enforcing the rules, its laws, budgets, a lot of the legitimate forms of power that are kind of exercised by authorities, budgets and so forth. You can also see it in boards and courts, and you can see it within organizations. The hidden power is that category that we developed that had more to do with what's going on behind the scenes, not always so visible, but very much there. And it has to do with setting the agenda, the power of influencing behind the scenes, the power of other actors, perhaps outside the formal government, who nonetheless have a lot of support. So a lot of that financial power that we talked about of private sector markets and so forth can come in here. We call it hidden power because it's not always visible, and yet I would say that more and more people are finding that it is visible. It is very visible, because increasingly so, perhaps. Um, I think you can also see some of the more perhaps coercive power, like the that you talked about, that you identified with monopolies, coercion, corruption, and so forth, is often behind the scenes and yet nonetheless has an enormous impact. So this is quite a big category of things. Some of it perhaps more legitimate, some of it less legitimate. And in Latin America, sometimes people make a little bit of a differentiation between the legitimate hidden power of mobilizing ideas and influence and the more coercive kinds of hidden power that might be experienced through uh, the drug uh, cartels, through paramilitaries, through political violence, and so forth. And sometimes they use different words for those. Then we move into the whole area that you were identifying as um, knowledge, scientific knowledge, other forms of knowledge, the norms and values and beliefs that go with those forms of knowledge, those ways of knowing, and how those are socialized and internalized in our upbringing, in our education, ideology. But also that are expressed through narratives and through communication and digitization. So all that lower quarter of the lower right side, where you identified all these forms of beliefs, knowledge, culture, was there in a couple of your squares. And then the last one is kind of includes all the others, but we're really looking at it through a systemic lens and looking at how institutionalized and systemic uh, forms of power coalesce into a more hardwired system. And we might see that in trade and commodity systems. We might see it in the way that market demands and systems and pricing and the way some of the market, some of those value chains that Nicolas described, for example, the Dutch one, I think is a really good example of systemic power operating in food and agriculture, where it's quite hardwired. And even if you had a different agenda or idea or values that you were bringing in, those systems are extremely difficult to shift. And there are other dynamics involved that can have to do with the legacy of colonialism, white supremacy, extractive capitalism, patriarchy, systems that are also very value-based, but are historically very powerful and have their own momentum and inertia. One thing I would say about these forms of power or dimensions of power, however, is that they're not fixed. They're very fluid, very dynamic. They are malleable, meaning they can be changed. And they're always being contested and changed in every moment that we experience and act and speak. These forms of power are being contested. So there are always opportunities and openings to change values, norms, beliefs, to articulate different narratives, to act in different ways. There are opportunities in hidden power to influence, to do advocacy. I think a lot of the stickies that you put up had to do with the opportunities and openings for civil society, for UNDP, for other actors to influence the visible power of decision making. There are opportunities to change the way those visible power spaces work by introducing new spaces, convening. We talked about convening power. One of you shared the convening power. That convening power is always changeable, and there are opportunities to convene in different ways, to open up spaces, to create new kinds of spaces. So just keeping in mind, some of it can seem quite um, impossible, quite dominating, coercive. But I think looking at power as always being open to possibilities for change and intervention, and that's what our jobs are. That's what we're trying to do with effective collaborative action, is to be aware of the power and to analyze it and to take action in effective ways that can shift it, and not to underestimate the power to make a difference in any given moment. And if we go to the next slide, just to briefly talk about some of these forms of really, you could call them forms of agency, different ways of exercising power individually and collectively. These are kind of the resources that we can draw on to make a difference, to influence change. So there are 4 of them here, but we might think of others, and I think we saw them reflected in the notes that you made on the slide. The power within is the sense of dignity, self-esteem, confidence, that we can make a difference. And a lot of it has to do with kind of personal agency, the value that we give to ourselves, and our ability to kind of step up and stand up when we need to in difficult contexts, where somebody mentioned, the sensitivities, where actually you can get in trouble if you speak up or say the wrong thing in the wrong space. So finding the inner power to be able to navigate those sensitive moments and speak up. Power 2 is where that power within gets translated into the capacity to speak, act, take choices, take action. That would maybe translate as agency. And a lot of when we think of the power 2, that's what we're talking about. Power with in the lower left relates to all the things that you put in the upper right, which is to do with collective action, collective strength, working together, alliances, partnership, mutual support, and so on. And that's where all of the power 2 of the individual and the power within of the individual come together to make more collective things possible. And finally, this is an interesting one, power 4. This has been added a little bit more recently to this framework, but it has to do with the power of developing a shared vision and values and ways of seeing what we're doing, that then becomes the possibility for shaping an alternative. So it's really the power of developing shared knowledge, beliefs, and values that can motivate, because it gives you a sense of where you're going. What is your destination? And if more people can share a similar idea about the goal and destination and vision of where we're going, then it's easier for those other forms of power to really come into play. So just in the interest of time, I'll stop there. You have a handout that you have access to, which has these frameworks described in a little bit more detail. Because what we'd like to do now is to try to apply them to some of your own experiences and cases. And you'll have that as reference, that 2-pager. But again, I don't think you should be too worried about using these words or these labels. I think you've already clearly got a lot of these tools in your belt and these understandings from what we did earlier. So this is more about moving into applying this to your own kind of experiences in food and agricultural commodity systems. But I'd like to just see if there are any questions or comments around this before we jump ahead.
Thank you, Jethro. And there's actually a question on from Pascali. Thank you, Pascali, for joining us. It's such a pleasure to have you here today with us. Well, there's actually two questions. One is around invisible power and systemic power being very much linked and similar. So the question is, why the need for the two categories? Which I briefly responded on the chat, but maybe just have a look and see if there's anything else to add. And then a reflection around, I guess, power for has to come before power with.
Yeah, great questions. And I totally agree with Pasquale about the invisible power, which is more than knowledge, beliefs, and norms, is very related to the systemic power. I think the reason that this has been divided out a little bit, Soleil described it really well here, is that you get institutionalized systems that are quite hardwired, even to the point where if you change your beliefs and intentions, or the power for, there's a kind of entropy or inertia, you know what I mean by that, a kind of momentum, where we still have to fulfill the mandate of the system, because there are holes to be filled and pipelines to be filled and products to be developed and shipped and processed and marketed and sold, and consumers with expectations. So these systems are, and also very powerful interests who benefit from these systems and benefit from keeping them intact, and might even oppose their transformation. So they're very, very strong systems. And I think the reason we separate it is because it isn't just about, if I believe in a different system, we can make it happen. Of course, we have to believe in it, but we also have to untangle the web that we saw, like with the Dutch system, you know, these very powerful systems with powerful concentration points and logics that keep them going, in the way everybody has been trained and in their careers. And there's so much at stake that keeps, and we see it with fossil fuels as well. You know, how difficult is it? It is, even when we have the alternatives to hand. So I think that's why it's been separated out. But it's a very good question. And I think I agree, the power for is vital. If we don't know where we're going and have some sense of direction, of what the alternative looks like, and we can build that collectively, it's very difficult to act. And Soleil, I see your hand.
Thank you, Jethro. And just to complement what you were saying in terms of the work that we are doing and some of the critical things that we are seeing. So if I can relate invisible power and systemic power to the current debate on the EUDR, for example, the EUDR came as a regulation that's fed by invisible power, and basically geopolitically, who has the voice to define and determine what sustainable production of key commodities is. But in a way, now there's a challenge to systemic power, because that power, that geopolitical power, is being challenged by the recipients or the countries that are affected by EUDR, in the sense of how are we going to respond to the EUDR, which might not necessarily be with compliance to it. You know, there are a lot of debates around, do we need to comply? How do we comply? To what extent? So that I think is a very good example of how invisible and systemic power connect to each other, but also how sometimes power shifts happen in the system inadvertently. Does that make sense, Jethro? And I know that we've been talking about the EUDR debate and the sustainable palm oil debate very much, and you're very, very aware of it.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good example, and it also shows the fact that all of these forms of power are going on at the same time. They're all happening and they're interrelating. But that also means that there are opportunities for complex, for really sets of strategies that different actors might be pursuing in different spaces. So it then becomes not only about what you in your role in UNDP can do, obviously that's very important, but seeing the whole system and all the moving parts and all the different forms of power going on. There may be other people who are working, say, very powerfully on narrative change in consumer habits and so forth, or people who are working on alternative trade systems or on different kinds of commodity priorities. And the convergence of those different strategies working on different faces of power can create unexpected changes in the system, as you mentioned with the UDR.
Excellent, thank you. There is another question from Nguyen on the topic. You also mentioned the powerless. So within the transformation power framework, beside the power within, power for, power to, should we include other dimension, power against overuse of power?
Yeah, excellent, Win. That's really good. I think when we get, this is really good because a follow-up step to this, for those of you who participate in the deep dive exercises, looking at country case studies and landscape case studies, and I really hope that you'll join. I think you'll find that when you move from the power analysis, where we're using these kinds of frameworks, into strategy, into what is to be done, what kinds of actions can be taken, then you begin to see things like you've described, power to resist, power to expose, power to engage, power to change ideas, change actions. Lots of different kinds of strategies can come out. And I think that's where you will see the power to could take the form of a power against, or a power to convince, or a power to resist or expose. So lots of different kinds of strategies that can come in. We saw the power of digital communication and narrative change. So I think you'll see when we get to strategy that these will expand into many, many different kinds of strategies. So thank you for that.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Jethro, and thank you everyone that's shared your questions. Any other questions or any reflections before we move into a final paired conversation and we come back to a closing? And as Jethro mentioned, this is just the beginning. We are going to offer a deeper dive into power, which means that there are going to be follow-up sessions that are definitely directly applied to your challenges and your work. Any other questions?
Great. So let's jump into this. And I think it's a chance for you to even bring your questions to your pair if you have any. What we're going to do is go into pairs. And because we have only about 10 minutes, I would say even less, one of you, see if you can apply some of this to a case that you have experienced or that you're working on. And it's basically a question of what kinds of power dynamics are going on in this case. And you'll have a tool available which has these arenas of power or faces of power that you can look at. You don't have to answer all of them, but we're just asking you to think about examples of where these forms of power have come up or other ones, and what kinds of responses you might have to that, whether that's UNDP responses or other actors. What could other actors do? So you get a picture of the bigger ecosystem of change. And what kinds of transformative power can you identify? What strategies could be used in those responses? So it's a very quick exercise, but it's just a chance to apply. And I think you're going into the groups now, so I hope that's clear. You can use the handout to put your answers.
Time flies when you're having fun, and we're almost there, 2 hours. Amazing how this has gone by, considering that we are on a virtual session and sitting for a long time. Thank you for staying and sharing and engaging with this session. So we won't go into further details in terms of reporting back, but we will share all the materials, as we said, and the handout particularly, where you will see all the explanation of the different forms of power that Jethro provided, and the template that you can use beyond this session to sort of reflect and analyze where and how are power dynamics showing up in a particular setting or challenge that you might have. Before you go, we just want to share a few things. As we said, before we go into the reflections, I do want to share the next steps. There is going to be a working with power deep dive, and it's going to be an opportunity to move from ideas and concepts to strategies on how to address power imbalances and action. So we're going to share a quick poll now, so please make sure that you add your name and email if you're interested in staying up to date for when those sessions are going to be launched. They are going to be launched through the FACS community of practice and the digital platforms, so you will receive information through there as well. If you can please share your feedback. We have a few questions that we would like to share with you. If you can take 2 or 3 minutes. The questions are basically, what did you learn? What did you enjoy? What changed, or what will you do differently based on what you've heard and learned today? And what would you like more of? There's a code there. We would really appreciate if you can leave us your comments so that we can document them and analyze them. But also feel free to open your mic and just share in the few minutes that we have left what your experience of this session has been. Thank you, Jethro. Otherwise, we will take a few minutes to fill out the survey while we are still together and before we jump into the next call of the day. Thank you for taking the time for this. And as we continue filling out the survey, I would like to pass it on to Nicola and to Jethro. Also thank Alexandra and Alejandra from our community team, our FACS community team, for your support today, making all this interaction and breakout groups and dynamic session happen. And over to you, Nicola and Jethro, for your final words, if you would like to say something.
No final words, just to say thank you for everyone for the participation and for coming to listen to this important topic. And we hope to see you for the deep dive. This is really going to be looking into the practice and the issues you're facing at your project level. So really very interesting. But yeah, very, very happy for this session, and thank you everyone. And Jethro, over to you. And thank you, Soleil, for facilitating today.
Thank you, Nicolas. Yeah, it's been really a pleasure and actually quite stimulating and enriching to hear about your experiences and insights. And I really look forward to seeing you again in the deep dives. I hope you'll join. And I think, as Soleil pointed out, this is an opportunity to, I think sometimes power analysis can be quite paralyzing, the paralysis of analysis, because it seems overwhelming. But I think what we've found in many years of using and evolving and developing these tools and multi-stakeholder processes and citizen participation and so on is that they can be very useful for strategy, for action, because each one of these forms of power, when you look at it, you begin to see where there are opportunities to make a difference, where there are openings, and where you can actually contribute to systemic change in concert with other actors and other initiatives. And I think that's really the beauty of it. It can be quite inspiring and empowering when you really get into the implications for action and the responses and strategic thinking around navigating power. So that would be our invitation, and we really hope to see you in the deep dives. And thank you, everyone, and especially to the FACS team for making this possible.
Thank you, Jethro. Thank you, Nicola. And thank you everyone else as well, because as we said, we are co-creating how to work with power. Yeah, it's as important as it might be to create the space and hold the space. It is to show up in that space as you've done and share your insights and interactions and conversations with one another. So it all makes it happen. It's not just a dumping of content. It's actually something that we work through together. So thank you very much. And yes, I will see you very, very soon.